boost of holiday-themed sales stem from the efforts of Durant Main Street and its partnership with Area Merchants working together to make downtown the place to be.
We really see downtown as the heartbeat of our city. You can come here to find everything from shopping to entertainment.
It's 5:32. We'll call the meeting to order. Before we do a roll call and invocation, first I just want to announce the swearing in of Dr. Thomas Newsom, and just on behalf of the commission and the city, just want to welcome you and thank you for your willingness to serve. We all certainly are looking forward to working with you, so thank you, appreciate it, and welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Would you mind doing, I'll do invocation, you do flag salute, you okay? If you would pray with me, please. Father God, we are always so grateful to be in your presence and have the opportunity to serve our community. Father God, I just ask that you give us the grace and wisdom to do it well. It's in the name of Jesus I ask, amen.
Would you please stand with me for our salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Drew Jackson,
Here.
Shane Knight,
Here.
Clint Horner, Whitney Kerr, Thomas Newsom.
Here. First order of business under consent items is approval of regular minutes for August 8th.
I move to approve.
Second.
Have a motion to second. Call for vote, please.
Drew Jackson,
Aye.
Shane Knight,
Aye.
Thomas Newsom.
Aye.
Moving down to the public hearings portion, 4A, discussion, consideration, and possible action on PC 2022-19, a rezoning request from I-1 Light Industrial to R3 General Residential, and a planned unit development for the property located near Hillcrest Avenue and McLean Road. There you are. Ms. O'Neill.
Just decided to pop up on you.
Yeah.
This is a request to do a rezoning from the I-1 to R3, as well as a planned unit development for property that's located at the corner of Hillcrest and McLean. You may remember this area. We had a rezoning of this area a while back as well. The applicant is wanting to move forward on a multifamily development, kind of a phased multifamily development at that corner. They're wanting to put in a gated community that's going to be multifamily, and that's kind of where the reason for the planned unit development. At the time of the report, we have received a few phone calls regarding the property. You guys had one of those in your packet, and then there may be some people in the audience today as well. Most of them have been questions. The concerns that was given to staff was about water, sewer, and traffic was the main concerns. And if you have questions about those, we have a staff member that can help answer those as well. The property is 40 acres in total. The area is made up of residential, industrial, and agricultural zone properties. As stated, this is going to be a kind of a two-phase project for family housing. There is water and sewer in the area. That's city water and sewer. The questions that came up during the initial review of for the planned unit development piece, a lot of those questions are going to be brought up as we get further down the road and when we do the actual permitting process, as far as the infrastructure and things like that. Some of the questions was about from the fire marshal, as far as exact placement of fire hydrants and different things like that will be addressed as we get further down the road. This is primarily just for the planned unit development piece, as well as the rezoning and the plat piece that goes with the planned unit development. The future land use map does have this as industrial, so it doesn't necessarily fall in line with that. But it does fall in line with the goals of the comprehensive plan, as far as providing the different types of infill housing and different types of housing. We do not have any issues. Staff doesn't have any issues with the type of project. Just noting that it doesn't currently meet the future land use map. But what usually happens when you adopt a future land use map, sometimes you have a big project that comes into town and it doesn't align with that, and you just have to take that in consideration one way or the other. So I'm just leaving that before you guys. Staff did sign off on this, supporting it. And again, those questions that was brought up would be addressed at the permitting side of things. The applicant would be required to get stormwater permit and things like that. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The applicant's also here if you have any questions for him. And yeah, there you go.
Thanks. First, just a comment about the future land use. When we were going through that, one of the discussions that we had is not drawing those lines down the streets.
Yes.
Obviously all of those changes in the request didn't get made before approval for lots of different reasons. But in terms of the intent, in the discussions that we had, I do feel like it fits within that.
Yes.
So
It definitely, yes, with the way that with the changes that have occurred in this particular area, yes, it definitely falls in line with what's happening now. Yes, I agree.
And again, in terms of the rezoning aspect, I think that, again, more in line with what we asked for the first time it came through. So,
Yes.
I certainly appreciate that from the owners.
Yes, it definitely makes more sense of having a residential use next to a residential use versus having a industrial next to residential. Yes.
Was there any questions for Ms. O'Neill?
I have two maybe cleanup questions.
Sure.
There was a note in our packet about the phone comments.
Yes.
And that was not in our packet.
It didn't make it. Okay.
So I don't know what those comments are. And I imagine they're probably some of the folks that may even be here tonight, but just if we could get that into the minutes for.
Yeah, and I do have
That in
that
here.
with me, and I'll go ahead and read that to you guys. I don't know why it didn't make it in there. I apologize for that. But he told me specifically he wouldn't be able to make it, so I'll go ahead and read that.
Okay.
It is Mr. Chambers, who is not in favor of the request because of the increase of traffic that the new development, as well as the sewer issues they currently have in the area. He feels the new development will only add to the problem. He noted that there is current noise and smell from CMC. That was the concern that he wanted me to make known to you guys. So.
Okay. My other question.
Sure.
If I can make a comment just to address that real quick. So the concerns about the sewer and water and all those issues, obviously those will be addressed through the official study and engineering and et cetera.
Yes.
My other question was just in regards to the agenda item. The rezoning and the PUD are one item,
Yes.
so they go hand in hand
Yes.
with one vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Markham, do you mind if I ask a question? Hypothetically speaking, if the commission were to want to recommend one and deny the other, would that be possible the way that the agenda is written?
I think it would, and Danielle and I spoke about this earlier. Because planning and zoning is a recommending body, I think that's the way it's written in the agenda puts the public on notice sufficiently for purposes of this body, and this body could take a recommendation that splits those and still not be out of compliance. I've talked to staff and recommended that on the council agenda, those be two separate items.
Right.
Because I think it is appropriate that for final action, beyond just a recommendation, that they be two separate items. But I think you guys could address those on a recommendation basis, and if you wanted to split them up, you could.
So that would be two separate motions in that
It
scenario?
would tonight if you wanted to take, I think you could make a joint motion if you wanted to recommend a denial as to both
Okay.
or approval as to both, or if you wanted to split them up, somebody could make two separate motions.
Well, I think that's kind of consistent throughout the agenda tonight, so it's good we clarify now.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate that. Any more questions for staff? Would the applicant like to speak?
Thank you. My name's David Rulina. I'm with SG Blocks, the current owner of the property. We employ about 65 to 70 people here in town at the Echo plant. We're in the process of adding another plant to our facility in another location, which will also employ somewhere between 65 and 70 people. One of the biggest problems that we have in employing people is finding housing for them. So we think this will have significant impact on our ability to grow our business because they'll have places where they can live. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. I think it's pretty straightforward what we're asking for. Thank you.
I did have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
So when we talk about the plan unit development aspect of it, again, I think the rezoning is pretty straightforward. In terms of the PUD, do we have details on what the plan would be? Street widths, parking sizes, what the facades would be, what the screening would be?
We do not have that currently. We've got some blocking that we've done.
Okay.
And we've got the roads laid out. I don't have anything that I could really show you that's in detail enough to give you what you're asking for, but when we go through the permitting process, all of that's going to have to be signed off.
Okay.
I think I have a question maybe along those same lines, but and this could be for you or for Danielle. My question is, what are we asking for in the PUD? Above what would be required in the R3 rezoning, because we don't seem to have any details as to what you're asking for.
Currently, the ordinance requires, regardless of zoning, of only having one primary structure per lot. So the biggest really within the PUD is having the multiple structures or multiple primary structures per lot with the multifamily zoning. Seems to be the biggest thing. They're also going to have some walking trails and things like that on there. Is kind of what has been discussed as far as exact locations and sizes and all that. That hasn't been fully discussed yet. So that may be something that'll be down the road once we get the actual permitting type of documents back. But that's the biggest thing, honestly, is for the planned unit development, is because we don't have anything to address the multiple structures on one lot other than the planned unit development.
Okay.
And the other reason we haven't gotten into the final details is we don't really know if we're going to be able to do certain things until we get through this PUD. So, but again, we will be back to show the community what's going to happen, and we've tried to work as closely as possible with the community up to this point.
I have one other question.
Yes, sir.
Or maybe one other question, and this may also be addressed for Danielle to answer, but so on the tandem garage parking that's proposed, we're showing 1.5 spaces per tandem garage.
I'm not sure.
And my question would be, specifically this one, Danielle, is the city going to allow a half space count on a garage? Because 2 of those could never be combined to make a spot like it would in a parking lot.
Right. I think the way I understood it is 1.5 per unit, but that doesn't mean that each unit will have 1.5 parking spots. So there's 100 units, we'll have 150 spaces.
Sure, you're required to have 2.5 spaces per unit.
Okay.
And with the current way this is laid out, and by the description given by your engineers, you're counting 1.5 spaces per tandem garage. So a tandem garage is where you go in nose to nose.
Right.
So that half space in the garage will never equate to a space like it would in a parking lot. In a parking lot, every 2 halves, we get an extra space for someone to park.
And I don't think from a market perspective it would make much sense for us to build a 1.5 unit garage. So we'll make sure we get that worked out. That's a fair question, and I think our engineers may not have addressed that the way it meant to be addressed.
Yeah, I think my follow-up to that's going to be, that's going to require a whole lot more on-site parking.
Correct.
Versus garage parking.
Yes, sir. I understand what you're saying.
All right.
Completely.
Any other questions?
I had the same question about the parking, because in the documents, it says 1.5 spaces per tandem, but then it says in the phase one, 624 spaces, so it was a little confusing whether they were just dividing 624, to get 1.5, or if it was actually 1.5 spaces, or if it was 150 spaces, so.
I think it also doesn't add up to what is shown on the plan either.
Yeah.
So.
But you've already addressed that, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Is there anyone who wanted to speak in opposition? Is there anyone who wanted to speak in opposition? If you would, please come to the mic. Give us your name, please.
I'm Joe Fulton. I don't know about opposition, but I'm just wondering, I've been over that way, and I know the road's in error right now. The roads have to be improved, and when they built CMC over there, they didn't have enough water. And to put a new water line, they barely got enough water for that, so the water would have to be improved before they have any multifamily dwellings.
Yes, that is something that would be addressed before they'd have a building permit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, thank you. Is there anyone else? I think just as part of discussion, I guess I want to be clear, this is not specific to the SG blocks, but more in reference to PUDs in general. I really think if we're going to have a planned unit development, we need to have details about the plan. Again, what parking is going to look like, what the streets are going to look like, screening, elevation heights, those type of things. So it's difficult for me to be in favor of a PUD without the details of what the changes would be from, just a regular R3 or, whatever zoning is in place. So again, this is in no way, shape, or form directed at SG blocks or this project, but the nature of how the city addresses PUDs. So if there's any other discussion, open to hear it. Sure, if you would come to the mic, please.
We've got some renderings here, but I just don't think they're the level of detail that you're after.
Yeah, and I guess to be more specific, I think the city needs these things in writing.
For sure, I understand that. So are you suggesting that you would prefer not to vote on, or you're going to vote the negative until you see that information? Do I understand that correctly?
My opinion is that before a plan unit development is even presented, those details ought to be down in writing for review and documentation. Again, I'm addressing more of how the city handles plan unit developments rather than yours specifically.
And that was never requested by us. There was never a request for us to do that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we would have done whatever we had to do to get through. Is it possible that we can get this done this evening and then bring it back to you for plan approval, for site plan approval?
That may be a better question for Danielle or Mr. Markham. Would you mind restating the question?
No, sir. The question is we can get the PUD approved this evening, and then we would bring back in writing the request that you just made for width of roads, shading, landscaping, all of those sorts of things, and a site plan approval by the council.
I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood the question the first time you put it. We would have to have those items in writing to consider to be able to vote on first. My understanding is you were asking if you could hammer those out tonight for our review, but we would not, take a vote and then you bring those items back on a following day. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure how I could do it this evening.
Sure. Yep. That's the question that I had.
Fair question. Would it be better at this point to table this request? Let us go back and do the things you're asking for? Because the way the PUD is described right now, none of that information has been asked for. So it has put us in a bad spot because we're trying to get this thing kicked off, and
And again, I want to be very clear, my comments are not directed at SG Block.
oh, I appreciate that.
And the project.
I completely appreciate that. You know, you're trying to do what you think is best for the community. I'm trying to do what I think is best for SG, so I get it.
I think I understand what Mr. Jackson's trying to say here, and that is, so with a planned unit development, there's typically an additional list, if you will, of rules and regulations
Yes, sir.
that we place on top of the zoning category. And it appears as though we're asked to approve a planned unit development with no additional rules on top of our R3, other than what Danielle mentioned earlier with we just needed the ability to put multiple buildings on it.
Well, in the way the way the code is currently written, there's not any way that we currently could build more than one unit on 40 acres. So I was under the impression, and Danielle, maybe you can clean this up, I thought this was as much maintenance as anything else.
I'm not, and Tom or you can correct me if I'm wrong, R3 is specifically multifamily, which is more than 2 dwelling units. So I don't know why that's an issue.
Later in the ordinance, it does, and it's called out and it's in the section for all zoning categories, where it says that it has its one dwelling or one primary structure per lot. And I know we talked about this before, and because our question was how did these apartments get on, and that's the question we've had, because the ordinance is quite clear where you have to have where it's only one primary structure per lot. Because we've then went back to the drawing boards figuring out, well, how do we allow this?
Yeah.
The only mechanism we have is if the lot's big enough where you can have the planned unit development. And the ordinance only has an outline development plan which was provided.
So
It doesn't give any specifics as far as the need for all these other things. Now, there is a facade ordinance, there is all of those things that's required within the ordinance itself. But it's not required within the PUD.
So, no, go ahead. So is it prudent for us to approve the PUD application with only the specific request of multiple primary buildings on a single lot?
I had the same thought.
I mean,
That's the only way that they'd be able to do their project.
I just feel like right now with the way it's written, we're approving a PUD that we don't know what any of the requests are.
And they're really the only request that they have is the multiple structures on one lot, to be honest. I mean, that's the only request that's been made. And as far as the facade and because whether it's a private drive or not, it's still got to meet city code, which is the 26 feet. And the facade's still got to meet, there's still the landscape requirement. I mean, there's all that stuff that's already in ordinance that they've got to meet regardless.
So just clarification, I think you've already stated this, but just to be clear, the only difference that they're requesting is multiple structures. There are no other differences from R3.
No. The setbacks and
I
all
think
that are
that's
going to
helpful.
meet, setbacks for R3 is going to be met, everything else is going to be met, and all other ordinances are going to be met. The only thing is the multiple structures per lot is the only difference from any other ordinance.
Okay.
That's the only request.
And I guess technically we can make that a part of the motion.
Okay, thank you. That actually answers my question.
Any other questions?
No, thank you,
think so.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I just got my questions answered.
Same. So, if the commission wanted to approve both together, it would be a motion for rezoning as well as the PUD allowing multiple structures. Is that correct? Okay. Or the option of tabling the latter.
I don't mind making that.
That's fine.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the rezoning request and the PUD request, with the stipulation on the PUD request that this is for a sole exemption to allow multiple buildings on one lot.
I'll second that.
Have a motion and a second. Please call for a vote.
Drew Jackson,
Aye.
Shane Knight,
Aye.
Thomas Newsom.
Aye.
Thank you all for that. I think the discussion was helpful on that. Appreciate it. Moving to 4B, discussion, consideration, possible action, PC 2022-20, a replat and rezoning from R2 two-family residential district to R3 general residential district for a property located on South 12th Avenue and West Texas Street.
This is another one that you guys have seen before. This is one that the applicant originally came with just a replat with. The applicant came back with a rezoning and a replat. The rezoning is in order to have the lots to actually meet the requirements for R3 rather than R2. The applicant has the hopes of separating 2 lots into 4, and the lots do meet the R3 requirements. The only thing that does not is the setbacks of the current lots do not meet the requirements. Total lot area that we're looking at is about 0.6 acres, and all 4 lots are divided up as about 0.14 acres apiece. The applicant does have an application to go before the Board of Adjustment for the September meeting for the variance for the setbacks. Staff has signed off on supporting the replat, and we don't have any issues with the rezoning. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The applicant's also here if you have any questions for him.
Yeah, I do have a question, and
Sure.
Thank you. Again, it's about the necessity for a variance. The way that I understand it now is that the city is in a worse position, if you will, than if the replat were be permitted. We have 2 structures on 1 lot, and as it's been presented before, they're non-conforming as is. So by doing the replat, we take these lots that are permanently non-conforming and make them conforming. So the item left to address is the setbacks. Those are sitting in place the same way they have for a long time, same owner. Seems to me like maybe a future owner would need a variance. I think the second part of that is hypothetically, or if I can throw a scenario out, let's say the non-conforming house burns to the ground and they have a variance to build back how it was, rather than turning and facing the street how it's supposed to be. It seems like the variance is working against the city rather than for the city. So it seems like that would be something, again, that would need to be addressed at a later time rather than this owner. So if you could help me understand why that's
Sure.
needed, I'd appreciate it.
And I did talk with Tom about this one as well, and through that conversation, because the conversation we had was whether or not they should apply for the variance at this point or just wait, because once the plat, if the plat is approved, then the plat will meet all requirements as far as the lots will meet all requirements for the R3, so the setbacks and all that would then be in place, but the current house would not. So then the current house would become non-conforming at that point. But then the problem is that the problem that we're making is we're making those houses non-conforming by approving the plat. By approving the plat as the way it is, then we're approving the setbacks, because the way that the ordinance reads is that you have to place setbacks on the plat.
So my understanding is that at least one, if not more, of the houses don't meet setbacks as is.
Most of them do not.
So by the replat, we're not creating, additional issues. But I guess addressing your recommendation to make, approve with that as the variance being a part of that motion, to me, that's counterintuitive because we're at least fixing the lots to be conforming, even if the houses are still non-conforming.
Right.
Does that?
It does, but then you're still having the non-conforming piece of the setbacks being that the setbacks do not meet current code.
So I'm not saying that they couldn't address that if that was, their choice and y'all's recommendation, but from the city's perspective, why wouldn't we fix the lots, whether we include the variance or not, as part of the motion?
Maybe Tom can help a little bit, but I feel like, and I don't know on the legal side of it, but I mean, whenever I look at it, with it being specifically called out needing to have the setbacks, then in my opinion, if you're going to approve a plat, then it's got to meet all those requirements, including setbacks. And if it doesn't meet the setback requirements, then it'll need a variance, because that's a requirement that doesn't need to. It's, in other words, whenever we're looking at a plat, we're saying that it meets all the requirements. It meets setbacks.
The motion that you're
things.
recommending would be contingent on a
Right.
variance. And so if they don't get the variance, we're stuck with the plat that we have now,
the
right?
the plat would be approved, but it would never be signed off on, because we hang on to that plat and it's not even signed off on until the variance is approved.
If our motion is a replat contingent upon them receiving a variance and they don't receive a variance, they wouldn't have the new plat.
Correct.
So the plat that's being proposed tonight puts the city in better shape than it is now, so I don't understand why we'd want the contingency. I'm not saying, hey, if you all feel like they need a variance, then go get a variance.
Right.
But the proposed plat
And
at least makes the lots conforming moving forward where they're
Right.
not now.
And if you
Tom,
guys don't,
If you had any input, I'm open to being educated.
I
I
think
just,
you accurately stated it. If you adopt the plat contingent upon the variance, and then either they don't apply for the variance or the variance is denied, then the entire plat goes away, and you're back to exactly where we are today. And I don't know whether that's better or worse, but that's where you would be. I mean, is there an additional question?
yeah, again, the lots as they are now are non-conforming. With the replat, they become conforming, so at least the city has those. So the contingency of the variance doesn't seem like that would be in the city's favor.
I mean, it's either all in the city's favor or none in the city's favor. If this board could recommend adopting the plat,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would be up to the landowner to then go get the variance if the landowner wanted to do that, but at least the plat would be in place. If it's contingent, then it's all or nothing. But if this board wants to recommend the adoption of the plat, then they could do that, and then it would be up to the landowner to go take that additional step later.
Did my example, so thank you, separate question. Did my example about the variance, in a scenario where the house burns down, are you familiar with the map?
I am, just
Okay.
vaguely. I've been by there, so.
So basically, one of the houses is going to be facing the wrong direction.
Correct.
And is currently. So hypothetically speaking, this house, is sold, which I think is the intent. Later burns. If they have a variance, are they able to build back as is, or would they be required to turn the house as it should be?
I think they probably have to come back and get another variance. It would be my thought. I don't know that a variance that, and depending on what the terms of the variance were that was recommended by the Board of Adjustment, I guess they could address all of those contingencies. I'd be hesitant to issue a variance that attempts to address future contingencies that may not happen.
I have a quick question along that. It mentions in our packet that the owner is already turned in an application for Board of Adjustment?
Yes.
Have they turned in 4 applications, one for each lot,
No,
or
it's just one for each of the.
one for
He
all
currently
4
owns-
lots?
He
Yes.
currently owns all 4 lots, so
Totally,
it's for
okay.
all, yes,
Okay.
one application for all 4 lots.
And if,
There's not 4 lots yet.
correct. Oh, yes, correct. If Board of Adjustment grants the variance, then any future buyer or the current owner could tear a house down and apply for a new building permit with those same variance setbacks. They wouldn't be required to meet our 25-foot setbacks. They'd only have to meet our, 16-foot setback on a couple of these lots.
I think that's right.
I'm
Yeah,
understanding that correctly,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's
Yeah.
right. After tonight, or if the council took action, they would be non-conforming, and then they wouldn't be able to do that. But once they got the variance, then they would be
Yeah.
able to.
I mean, I'll lay my cards on the table. I'm in favor of the plat. I'm not in favor of the variance. Because I think if anyone in the future wants to come do something to one of these homes or rebuild one, then they need to be able to meet the requirements, not have a 14-foot setback off the street.
I think even a 50% remodel would require
Yeah,
a change.
okay.
And that's perfectly fine. Like I said, the biggest reason that staff went ahead and had him do that was, 1, we were up against that deadline, and 2, the ordinances simply state that it has to have the setbacks on there, which mean whenever we look at it, if it meets it or it don't. And if it don't meet it, then we don't sign off on it, or we make a note on it, and then if it doesn't meet it, then they have to go through the variance process. That's what we do. So that's why it's noted on there. But you guys, that doesn't mean that you guys have to follow that course of action. You guys can do your own course of action.
Appreciate it. Any other questions for Ms. O'Neill or staff? Welcome, Whitney. We're on 4B if you didn't know already. Would the applicant like to speak?
I'm sorry, Danielle, I do have a question. So is this a situation where we're, like the other previous question, can we break these up? Or is it when we vote on this, are we voting for the setback and the variance? Are we?
No, you'll be just voting on this is a replat and a
The replat, I'm
rezoning.
sorry, the
Yes.
replat and the variance, okay.
Yeah, and if you wanted to, if I'm not mistaken, Tom, you can do these together, or you can do them separate. Is that correct?
So we're looking at a rezoning and a replat.
Yes.
Those are the two
We could vote
items.
on 2 different things. Okay.
If you so choose, yes.
Or we could say, subject to the approval of the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, and I think my question was, the staff recommendation said that they would prefer contingent upon variance granted by a Board of Adjustment. My question whether that actually needs to be a part of the motion or not.
Right.
Yeah,
But
okay.
if they don't grant like as Tom mentioned, if they don't grant the variance, then the plat will not be valid.
Because I'm with Mr. Knight, I think the replat works. That setback is concerning.
And the setbacks could be a non-conforming piece until that time. I mean, if that's the way you guys wanted to work. It's up to you.
Thanks. Appreciate it. If you would state your name.
My name is Mike LaSawyer, and I'm the owner of the properties that are in question here. I have put these houses on the market prior to doing this because I didn't realize all this was going to have to take place. But I have disclosed to the current potential buyers that these are non-conforming, and if something ever happened, they would have to meet the new codes as far as setback and things like that. So I've disclosed that to them, and they do understand that if they were to ever tear the house down, they would have to bring it back to code for current code and not things that have been in existence since the 60s. So I have disclosed that to all 4 potential buyers, and they are aware of that. And the houses have been updated here and there over the years, and I think it's going to be some time before they ever have to be updated again. There's one of them that potentially needs to be, something's going to have to be done to it in the potential near future, and they are aware that if something were to be done, that the house would have to be turned to meet Texas Street instead of 12th, and they're aware of the setbacks and the rest of the property. So that has been disclosed to them, so. Appreciate
Thank you. Any questions? Thanks. Is there anyone else?
And thanks for redoing this also. I know we saw you a few months ago.
Absolutely. I'm trying to follow.
Yeah, this is just a much better option in general, so thank you. Yeah.
Agreed, thank you. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak? Is there any discussion?
I have one, maybe clarification. The request is for a rezoning and a replat. I don't know that there are any contingencies for us to consider other than there was a recommendation by staff that it be contingent upon the variance. But the request is not that, so I don't know that we necessarily have to clarify that.
That's true.
I mean, we could approve this tonight as presented and it's a done deal. It's a done deal in terms of our recommendation to council. Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure I was understanding that correctly.
Yeah. Any further discussion? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve PC 2022-20 for the rezoning from R2 to R3 and the replat as presented.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Drew Jackson.
Aye.
Shane Knight.
Aye.
Whitney Kerr. Aye. Thomas Newsome.
Aye.
Item passes. 4C, discussion, consideration, possible action, PC 2022-21, a rezoning request from A1 agricultural to R1 single-family residential property located along Cemetery Road. Ms. O'Neill.
This is a rezoning for some property that's located along Cemetery Road. Most of the area is either zoned ag or R3. The hopes of the applicant is to build some single-family homes, and as a note, there's a large area of the northern part that is within the floodplain, and they've considered that and are well aware of that. We have not received any phone calls or letters or anything about this property. It is about 47 acres in total. It's currently a vacant lot. Before this property will have to go through the platting process before it's sold or broke up or anything, so just as a note of that. The future land use map has this area as low density residential, so it does meet that. We don't have staff doesn't have any issues with the rezoning, so if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, and a representative of the applicant's also here.
Thanks. Any questions?
I have probably not a question, but there was and you clarified it via an email that you put in our packet, but there was a question about whether the applicant wanted R1 or R2 in this
Correct.
request.
Yes.
You clarified with him and he confirmed it was
Yes.
R1.
Yes. That is correct.
But he also mentions duplexes in his application.
Yes,
And are
he
they
does.
aware that duplexes are not allowed in this
He is aware.
request?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
We had a phone conversation, and he's aware that it's single-family homes.
All right. I just wanted to make sure he
Yep.
was good with that.
Yep.
So just to be certain, is this in the same area as the 2 or 3 other
applications we've seen for housing developments where there've already been complaints about the sewer and water system in that direction of town and whether or not it can keep up with the increased demand out there?
It's close. It's just north of the cemetery. So it's kind of just south of kind of this area, the other areas we're looking at, but it's in that general vicinity. So it's in that general area that there are some issues, yes. And to my knowledge, they don't have any plans. I haven't heard of any plans of or platting that's going on currently. And the applicant or representative of the applicant can probably answer that better. But that's something that, I mean, just as a city as a whole, we're looking at and Public Works is looking at, trying to figure out.
So I guess my other issue that I have kind of a question about, and it's not really spot zoning because we do have sort of this touch of R3 at the north end. But I guess my question or my issue with that is if the north part or the north half of that property is all in the floodplain and they can't use that for what they're wanting to do, and essentially we're dealing with the south half. The south half is nowhere close to the R3, and everything around the south half. Sorry, it's been a long day. Everything around the south half is A1. It's one of those, we're not spot zoning, but we're getting uncomfortably close to sticking a new zoning category in the middle of everything else.
Right, and I'm not sure what their plans are as far as how to handle the floodplain.
They're asking for R1. Okay, I thought you were maybe thinking they were asking for R3.
No,
So-
and no, I just meant that there's an R3, so technically there is.
There's an R3 at the
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so with it, I guess the way I looked at it is with the whole property being rezoned, then that kind of made me more comfortable with it than if they were to ask for, because I'm sure they'll still do something with it and not just leave it, to the wolves, so to speak, but they'll probably use it for some sort of common area or something like that. I'm sure that'll benefit the neighborhood versus not. But again, that's something for the plans to be seen in the future. But that's kind of how I kind of reason with it is at least it's not. You're right. If it was just that southern half, then I'd probably be like, yeah, I don't know about that. But with it being that whole 47 acres, I was a little more comfortable with that in my mind.
Oh, I will say too, there's nothing that prevents them from building in that flood zone as long as it's mitigated and built according to the classification it's in. But
currently, I mean, there's certain areas that they would not. Right.
Correct. Yes.
But yeah, at least for currently. I mean, that staff's looking at some things, but currently, yeah. It's never a good idea to build in a floodplain, though.
Any other questions? Would the applicant like to speak?
I'm not the applicant, but again, I'm Michael Sawyer. I own the property that's adjacent to this, the 10 acres to the north of the property that's in question. And I'm highly in favor of this because the area is currently home to the homeless. Everything that I've owned on that current property has been burned to the ground. There's been 5 homes on that property that I own that have been burned to the ground. It was recently burned again about a month ago. I know Jake has had some issues on his land as well with some stolen stuff. So anything that we can do to bring residents to that area and activity would be welcomed in my eyes. I know the majority of my property that I own is in the floodplain, which as soon as I wrap up this other stuff, I plan on trying to redo that as well to kind of match some of the things that that Jake intends to do with his property to help that develop that area a little bit more. I know there's a bunch of hoops I have to jump through to get that done, but that's the goal in mind. So anything that we can do to that area to increase population and also to increase to help mitigate the homeless and the vandalism and things on that side of town and help bring it up, I'm all for. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's just my take.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? If you would come to the mic and state your name, please.
I'm working with Jake on this. My name is Alicia Lizarraga. I'm with Red River Development Construction. And we've looked at everything. We had a meeting with these guys with the zoning and planning. And the main thing is there are 25 acres that are not in the flood zone. That would be for single family. And it goes along with the plan, the future plan that she told me about, the R1 does. So that's what we're looking at. And the flood zone we haven't even looked at yet. We don't know what can be done there. So, and there is room for a park, what we were planning, but we just needed to get it rezoned to move forward. And that's where we're at.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Whitney, I had the same question that you did initially. I think what made me comfortable with it is, if the city is going to be growing, we're going to have some transitions. The easiest, if you might say, maybe most prudent or gentle transition from ag is R1. If we're going to increase population, that's maybe the most gentle way to do it. So.
Well, if I'm correct, two of the bordering properties, one is a cemetery, and the other is owned by the city, correct? Yeah.
Any other discussion? In that case, is there a motion?
I make a motion to approve PC 2022-21, rezoning from A1 to R1.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Would call for a vote, please.
Drew Jackson.
Aye.
Shane Knight.
Aye.
Whitney Kerr.
Aye.
Thomas Newsom.
Aye.
Motion passes. 4D, discussion, consideration, possible action, PC 2022-22, a rezoning request from R1 single-family residential, C2 highway commercial and commercial recreation, and the I1 light industrial district to I1 light industrial district for property located at 1903 North First Avenue. Ms. O'Neill. You got tongue-tied on that one.
You had to throw a lot of twos at you and then a lot of zoning categories for you too. This is a piece of property that was discovered that had multiple zoning on the property, as well as through the due diligence of a potential buyer on the property. The surrounding properties is a mix of, well, it's kind of a mix of it all too. Has commercial, industrial, and ag, and residential, so it's kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge area up there. But the main reason behind the rezoning is to fix the multiple zoning categories to one. We have not received any calls or letters about the rezoning on this one. They are asking for I1. The ordinances do allow the self-storage units by right in I1 and I2, and then it has a restrictive in C2 and C3, which calls for the conditional use permit. The future land use map has this area as a mixed-use area of commercial and residential, so the future land use map the request is not in line with the future land use map. So staff is in support of fixing the mixed zoning, but the concern is that it's not in line with the future land use map. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and I believe the applicant's also here, or applicants.
Danielle, what is are there any retail limitations in I-1? or is it?
The way the current ordinance is written is that with I-1, you can have anything from ag all the way up to I-1 within that zoning category. You just have to meet the current setbacks and all that for the more restrictive category. And whatever other requirements are within that more restrictive category. So there's not any requirement saying that in I-1 you couldn't have a commercial use or anything in that, in I-1.
Any other questions? If the applicant's here, would you like to speak? If you would state your name, please.
My name is Russ Parker. I am a realtor representing the buyers and the sellers, both present. I really just want to answer any questions you might have. It's already got an I-1 attached to it. It's also got a C2 attached to it, and it's got an R1 attached to it. So we're just really trying to do some housekeeping. It's much better for the new buyers if they go in and they know exactly what zone they're dealing with. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or feel free to ask the owners.
I have a couple of concerns, and you may be able to answer this on behalf of the buyer. I mean, I'm not in favor of an I-1 at this location.
Okay.
And I know I-1 allows the self-storages that are already there, that's partially already zoned on this property. I think I-1 is opening this particular piece of property up to some things that might not be desirable at that location.
Okay.
And not that your owners are planning that. I'm talking,
Future.
10, 20 years down the road from now.
Okay.
I think with the increased growth with our sort of downtown city limits area, that I-1 at that particular location is probably not an ideal classification. We've got a university directly to the south. We've got 2 new Durant School District campuses to the north. Increased pedestrian activity along that area. And this is just my opinion, I'm one of 4 up here right now. I don't think it's the right designation for that particular piece of property. It does not, as Danielle mentioned, fit into our future land use designation for that area. However, C2 does.
And we're fine with that. And
would your clients be open to a potential C2 here, knowing that they have to get a conditional use to do the storages, but
yeah,
is that an option for them?
That is an option.
Okay.
We would adhere to that, sure.
Okay. Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tried to make it easy.
I think, and Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in that scenario, since the request is for I-1, would that have to come as a request again next month? Or since it's a lesser...
I don't think so. Since it's a more, kind of how we've addressed this before, is the public's on notice at an I-2 level. If this body decides to recommend a more restrictive use, then I believe that can be done. As long as it's a more restrictive. If this board decided, hey, we want to make it I-2, I would say no, the public was only on notice at an I-1 level. So if the applicant and the board agree that a C2 is appropriate and this body wants to make that recommendation at a C2 level, I think that's appropriate. And just to kind of go back to a previous statement, if the C2 level is recommended by this body and then adopted by council, there wouldn't have to be a conditional use permit for the operation of the storage units. They would be non-conforming until there was some material change, if they expanded or did anything that required a permit from the city, then they would have to get that conditional use. But if the C2 zoning was approved, They could operate as is, as non-conforming until such time that a permit was warranted. And then they would have to go through that conditional use permit.
Mr. Markham, would that,
Is that
That's correct, but then I know they're also looking at a sign permit, so I'm just throwing that out there.
But this would buy them time to go ahead and operate, but then seek that conditional use permit. It wouldn't be something that would have to be done immediately unless there was some work that they wanted to do that would require that.
But the sign would require a special permit?
Probably so. Anything that would generate a permit from the city would probably take you out of that non-conforming. We could look at it, but it would take you out of that non-conforming use. A sign permit may not, because it doesn't have anything to do with the operation itself, but if you were to renovate, that would require permits. If you were to expand, if you were to do those things, it would trigger that exit from the non-conforming status, would be my thought.
Like a building permit,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, okay.
Either a renovation or anything like that.
so if that's the case, the sale of the property would also not create the need for a CUP, correct?
Yeah, they're not really, well, the sale might take them out of the non-conforming status.
Well, so the self-storage is restricted in C2 and C3, so they would need some sort of CUP or something, correct? So I guess that was the nature of my question.
If they're non-conforming, that would be, like Tom was talking about, if they're non-conforming, then they wouldn't necessarily need one. But if they come before anything, and I can't remember if in that non-conforming, if the sale of the property triggers that at all.
They're non-conforming now.
Right, they're non-conforming the way it is now.
We're making it a less messy non-conforming by approving
By a
this.
uniform
Correct.
zone.
Or by giving it some sort of single designation.
Correct.
Classification.
Yeah, and making it an easier non-conforming.
No.
I don't think the sale triggers anything. I think
I don't
it's,
think it does,
I
but
think
I'm
it's
not-
the
It's the
building
use.
permit, if the use changes, if we do significant upgrades. I really don't even think the
Remains dormant,
sign
I
is
think.
gonna kick in, but the sale will not, I don't think the sale would cause a problem.
As long as the use doesn't change.
Yeah, I think I'm not city staff, but, and the guy behind you could probably answer the question, but I just don't think you're gonna be able to pull a building permit to do anything additional without the non-conforming, or the, the conditional use.
And that's fine.
Right, okay.
And just further information, it is under contract. Obviously, with the buyer, we'll close the day this is approved. So we're anxious to get that done, so if it doesn't require a special permit, then that would be great.
Understood, thank you.
So I have a question though, and in full disclosure, I'm the president of the university that shares a boundary with this property. Is there any intent for different use of this property than it currently is used? Is it?
No, the buyer's here, he can address that, but to my knowledge at this point, no.
If you would state your name, please.
My name is Brad Bahari. I'm the buyer. No, we have no intent to change the use of the property. The reason why we wanted to do this is obviously because I've never seen a property like this where there's multiple zonings. We just wanted to clean it up, make sure it's good for us, and in the future, if we wanted to sell it, possible, potential future buyers will also look at that as a negative point. So we just wanted to clean it up, and then I've spoken to Danielle before. Hey, Danielle. So C2 will work, but just because there was already I-1 in the parcel and there's I-1 surrounding it, and it's apparently the less restrictive, that's why we requested I-1. We just thought maybe we can expand what's in there to the whole parcel. But if that doesn't line up with the future plans of the city, that's understandable. But to answer your question, no, we are not planning to change the use in the future.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
No worries.
Yeah, I just comment, I agree with Shane. I think it's C2 makes more sense. And I would support that.
I agree, I would have certainly a reservation on other things allowed in industrial, so. Thank you, appreciate it. Thanks. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? I think we've had some discussion.
I do
but,
appreciate the fact that they're coming to us to try to clean this up, because it is,
Yep.
this multiple zoning issue there is a challenge, I know.
Yep, agreed. Thank you. Any other discussion?
I have a question, maybe for Whitney. Are we approving by going from an I request to a C2 request? Are we approving a more restrictive use there? Are we approving a less restrictive?
So it's considered more restrictive because there are more provisions that a C2 has to meet in terms of setbacks, everything else. So that's why, that's the reason it will be considered more restrictive. It's a little wonky just because it's a whole different category of zoning. So I don't love the fact that we would be looking at shifting from people who got notified of an industrial request versus a commercial request. But Mr. Markham's absolutely correct. It is considered a more restrictive category because of the setbacks and everything else.
As a general rule, in the past, we've taken the table that goes from agricultural through residential, commercial, and industrial, and considered it most restrictive on the far left, all the way to least restrictive on the far right, and commercial, all the commercial codes are left of industrial. So while, and as the ordinance currently allows, anything that's allowed in a commercial designation is also allowed in an industrial designation, but not vice versa. So there's some nuances there, but I think a commercial is considered more, any commercial designation is more restrictive than any industrial classification.
Yeah. My thoughts as well. I just wanted to make sure I was thinking correctly.
Is there a motion? Jane, you've got all the others.
I'm trying to think how to word that.
I guess the motion would be a recommendation for C2?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I make a motion on PC 2022-22 for recommending a C2 zoning classification over the entire property as opposed to the I1 that was requested for the property.
I will second.
Have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Drew Jackson.
Aye.
Shane Knight.
Aye.
Whitney Kerr.
Aye.
Thomas Newsome.
Aye.
Motion passes. Danielle, is there any new business? We have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Do we need a second on that?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.